It's 23 away from 5. You're listening to ABC New South Wales. Simon Lauder with you, and stay tuned. If you're in a fire-affected area, you will get those regular updates. Well, no more logging in native forests by 2030. That's the promise the Victorian Government has made recently, with an immediate ban on harvesting old-growth forests. The intention is that plantation timber will provide the state with that. It's the kind of move that sparked a big response, both for and against the decision. Of course, Victorian timber workers say their communities will become ghost towns, with concerns over the impact of job losses. Alternatively, environmentalists have celebrated the news, so are we at all likely to see New South Wales follow the Victorian path? In a minute, you'll hear from both sides of the debate. The Australian Forest Products Association will join us with spokesman Ross Hampton, and the Nature Conservation Council will get a look in as well to talk about the Victorian decision. And, well, it seems it's already having an impact on this side of the border. Alan Richards is the Managing Director of Blue Ridge Hardwoods at Eden on the far south coast. He's not only worried about job losses, but also fire risk.
We used to own sawmills right through East Gippsland, and the timber industry's been, the death of 1,000 cuts, and, that's just going to put the brakes on regional communities throughout East Gippsland dramatically, because the timber industry is still a very strongly based regional employer. I don't see the sanity in it really, because you've only got to have a look at the northern New South Wales and Queensland bushfires to realise that locking up fire is so-called protection, when it's not protected at all. It's just at the mercy of wildfire. And all Daniel Andrews is doing is just increasing the intensity of the catastrophic impact of wildfire.
That's Alan Richards, the Managing Director of Blue Ridge Hardwoods at Eden, concerned about what's happened over the border with the Victorian Government's killing off one of the state's oldest industries. Well, let's see if there are implications for New South Wales. Ross Hampton is the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Forest Products Association. Ross Hampton, good afternoon.
Hi, Simon.
What does this mean for New South Wales, if anything?
Well, I'd love to come to that, but also just want to acknowledge those fires. I think we should, before we start. I know that your listeners have been hearing those updates wisely from the ABC all afternoon. I think Chris is joining us on the line too from NCC, and I think we should acknowledge that their members and our members are probably side by side in the bush right now on that North Coast area, trying to save lives and property. So, let's just do that at first if we could. Yes,
good afternoon as well to Chris Gambian, the Chief Executive Officer of the Nature Conservation Council.
G'day, Simon. How are you? And yes, Ross is quite right. Those fires are obviously pretty dreadful for a lot of communities. I know some of my staff are fighting to protect their properties and their homes. So, our thoughts to all of them.
Absolutely, and coverage continuing right here on ABC New South Wales this afternoon. Ross, now to this decision by the Victorian Government. What implications are there for New South Wales?
Well, actually, we think probably not many, to be honest. And I know you said in your intro that environmentalists have welcomed the news, but it really should have said some environmentalists, because at a global level, environmentalists want to see more sustainable forestry like we do in Australia. In fact, coincidentally, I'm fulfilling one of my UN FAO duties next week in Brussels, where I gather with an advisory council to talk about ways that we can encourage nations where they practice deforestation to do forestry more like we do in Australia. And what we do in Australia, if you look out your window, Simon, and you see 10,000 trees in New South Wales, forest industries in New South Wales use about 10 of those 10,000. And the big difference is in Australia, this includes Victoria, those trees are replanted and regenerated by law. So we actually see people moving away quickly from Daniel Andrews' decision in Victoria. The Labor Party, the opposition in Tasmania, also have already distanced themselves from it. And the Federal Labor Party, as I'm sure Chris will have observed overnight, has also distanced themselves from that decision and said they support our native forest industries. So we think actually this decision won't stand up till the next election.
Ross Hampton, thank you. And to you now, Chris Gambian from the Nature Conservation Council. The Victorian Government phasing out native timber logging by 2030, an immediate ban on logging old-growth forests. Do you see any scenario in which New South Wales would follow suit?
Well, I think I guess I half agree with Ross, which is to say the implications for New South Wales are quite different. In no sense is New South Wales following Victoria in this decision, because actually Victoria have been the laggards. New South Wales banned old-growth logging many, many years ago now. It was an arduous process at the time, but one that I think all of us now acknowledge was the right choice. We have most of our logging industry in New South Wales happens through plantations, which is appropriate. Our view is that we would like to see a phasing out of native timber logging in our state forests, in our public forests. But I'd like to see a strong plantation timber industry. I don't think that it's right to say that we should somehow abandon hardwood logging. We just need to do it in a sustainable way, and certainly Ross is quite right. Around the world, people can follow our example on this.
Okay, well, Ross Hampton, could New South Wales go to plantation only?
We have been trying to do more plantation hardwood. It's true. I think Chris and I are going to agree on quite a bit this afternoon. The old growth thing, by the way, just to get it out of the way, is just a complete red herring. The Premier, for his own reasons, decided to make an announcement about something that had already been announced by the industry last year. So there is zero old-growth logging in Victoria, and I agree with Chris about that, Simon, that this is the way of the future for sure. Where the challenge is in relation to the hardwood replacing the native forest timber in plantations is it just... I know Chris is aware of this as well. It just has not worked out that way. These trees don't... The trees that we use for our beautiful timber desks, for example, probably that radio desk you're sitting at there, Simon, the interior of the Victorian Parliament, for example, the hardwood floors we walk on, these sorts of trees we've tried pretty hard to grow in plantation estates in the different states, including in New South Wales on the north coast there, as Chris would be aware. But they grow best in the bush, and if we don't want to use them from Australia for those things, we're going to have to import them from places where they practice deforestation, these slow-growing hardwoods. And just to show you how hard it is, the Queensland Government has just announced that after 10 years of saying that they wouldn't do any more forestry using the native estate and that they would do it all by plantations, they've just had to announce that they're going back into the native hardwood estate. Chris is right too, as I say, Simon, we're going to have a lot of agreement, I think, that this is not a large part of the industry, certainly not the majority of the industry. Most of our timber in Australia for our house frames and that we use for cardboard and other products like that, paper cups, that comes from plantations, and we're delighted that it does. It's terrific. But the materials that make that beautiful door that you're looking at, or that window frame, or that staircase, that's our slow-growing trees.
Okay, and Ross Hampton, does harvesting in state forests employ more people than harvesting in plantations?
Well, it does as well. I mean, I think the employment issue and the regional security issue of this is a very important part of the story in Victoria, and it's naturally one that the communities are going to pretty quickly down there, because these are integrated communities, and if you take out the largest hardwood sawmill in Australia, for example, is in Hayfield. If that mill was to close, then certainly you'd lose the butcher and the pharmacy and the doctor and the school. There's 170 people would go. You'd hollow out regional communities. So that is a major part of the story, and I understand why the people in Victoria and the regions are particularly looking to tell that story now. But the really crazy thing from my point of view is that this is a great... Forestry in Australia is just a great story on every front. It's great for climate change. It's great for carbon sequestration. The international scientists all tell us that. It's great for the environment. It's great for looking after the bush in relation to bushfires with crews and roads and equipment. And it's great for the timber we get from them, and it's great for employment if we do it sustainably. And again, this is where I would agree with, I think, what Chris would want to say. It has to be small amounts done in a sustainable way where every tree that you use you replace.
We're speaking with Ross Hampton, the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Forest Products Association. We're also joined by Chris Gambian, the Chief Executive Officer of the Nature Conservation Council, discussing the Victorian Government's decision to phase out logging in state forests and go to plantation only. Chris, do you accept Ross's point that there's just some very marketable and necessary timbers that you can't get out of plantation forests?
Well, I guess I'd say a couple of things, and I think Ross is right. We probably aren't going to be wildly in disagreement today. There's probably a lot more that we have in common than separates us. I guess the point I'd make about the industry itself, and I think this doesn't get talked about enough, and I'm probably a strange person to be the one advocating for it, but there's a lot of discussion about the jobs from the industry, and I'd like to see the industry have good quality jobs, sustainable, secure jobs. What we've got in the industry at the moment is probably more insecurity than those workers deserve. Probably not as well paid as the job should be, and probably not as safe as the job should be. What we could have in New South Wales, and certainly one of the things I'd like to advocate for, and Ross, I'd be really keen to talk to you about how we could work together on it, is how do we have a hardwood timber industry that is sustainable, that is bigger, that provides for really well-paid jobs, that is profitable, because there is some doubt about how profitable the hardwood side of the forestry business has been over the last few years, and one that, recognising that, yes, there is a particular type of tree that we need for certain applications, and I know there's also sort of alternatives around for some of those products as well, but leave that to one side. Yes, there is a particular type of tree that's needed. How do we build up the hardwood industry, including building up hardwood plantations? I've heard recently some better than expected results in terms of growth for some of these plantings. If that can turn into sort of a snowball effect and we can get a better hardwood industry, then I think that's good for everybody. And I'd really like to see some sort of public policy that says, how do we make this an asset for the state that is bigger than it currently is? I absolutely agree 100% with Ross when he says what we don't want to do is replace hardwood timber products from Australia with overseas timber, because from a conservationist point of view, all that does is export a conservation problem to another country, usually a developing world country. So yes, we'd like to have a strong industry here, but I'd like us to put our heads together and think about ways that we can do it in a way that is more sustainable, in a way that ensures that we're protecting habitat better than we currently are. And one thing I probably just want to chuck into the discussion is the process the state government's going on with at the moment, which is reassessing what's called the old growth maps in state forests. These have existed for a couple of decades. There is sort of some move to expand these maps. We'd say that is obviously quite concerning, and we've lobbied the government hard to not go ahead with that process. But look, I accept the argument that we want to have a strong timber industry in New South Wales.
Well, and on top of that, we've got the development in New South Wales where the government is investigating the privatisation of plantations. That might be a discussion for another day, but perhaps relevant as well. Ross Hampton from the Australian Forest Products Association and Chris Gambian from the Nature Conservation Council. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.